On August 24, 2020, Ukraine was celebrating the 29th anniversary of its independence, the main state holiday, on St. Sophia Square. This place is the country's main spiritual stronghold and home to magnificent St. Sophia Cathedral, which is the oldest church of Ukraine, built by Prince Yaroslav the Wise. Since ancient times, crucial events of Ukrainian history have taken place here.
Descend to my heart!
The state was celebrating the 29th anniversary of its independence under the sincere gaze of this guy in a military uniform. From this huge banner, Staff Sergeant of Ukraine's National Guard Vitaliy Markiv was overlooking the entire country with a smile and a slight reproach. Just like he was looking at his compatriots from hundreds of other placards, big and small, hoisted on every military base of the National Guard as well in police department buildings across the country. Even at the UEFA Championship match between Ukrainian Shakhtar and Italian Atalanta. Our team lost on that day, but nearly a year later, after exhausting efforts, Ukraine won an indisputable victory. Without doubt, Vitaliy Markiv's drama that lasted for 6 years was the most positive story for Ukraine in the difficult lockdown year of 2020.
This is Italy talking.
The resort city of Rimini is located on the Adriatic Sea coast in central Italy in Emilia-Romagna region. Tourist booklets call it a perfect holiday destination for those who want to combine beach recreation, night clubbing, and architectural sightseeing. It is an Italian Miami in a way. That's where Vitaliy Markiv, a young boy born in Ternopil region, lived for 5 years without any trouble, working in clubs as a DJ. He moved to Italy at the age of 11, together with his mother. Like tens of thousands of Ukrainians, she came to live and work in the comfortable South European country after marrying an Italian man.
I adapted to Italy and its traditions in no time. I learned the language in no time. I speak Italian almost without an accent. Not all Italians believed that I was from the Ukraine because I spoke Italian fluently. I had an opportunity to study abroad, to obtain education there, to work, and basically live according to the European values my compatriots were heading to.
Night parties and gym workouts didn't make Vitaliy break ties with his fatherland. He cherished Ukrainian culture, language, and traditions.
Of course, Italy is a big European country, a founder of the G7. But it has small nuances. And no matter what people say or do, no matter who you are, especially if you are a foreigner, you will never become a full-fledged citizen there.
One evening, on the last day of autumn 2013, the comfortable life in a paradise tourist city on the Adriatic coast came to an end.
At that time, I was into fitness and bodybuilding. I was working in a gym as well. One evening, I came home after work and the workout.
Now go!
In Ukraine, the Berkut riot police brutally beat peaceful protesters, students. I turned on the video and saw the first scenes. They were beating everyone under the stela. I couldn't believe my eyes. It had never occurred to me that such violence would be used against peaceful demonstrators, students, women, and elderly.
A week later, he came to Ukraine, but this time he didn't come for Christmas vacations to see his relatives like he used to before. He went straight to Kyiv, inspired by the national protest on the Maidan.
It took me a few hours to understand it was my thing. The most important thing is the emotions I felt when I came to Kreshchatyk, strolled across the Maidan and talked to those people. I lack words to describe those emotions. I even felt goosebumps on my skin. It felt like home.
For a solid 3 months, he was on the Maidan, fighting for Ukraine's European future. He was there when the first violent clashes with the police broke out, and when the first protesters were killed by gunfire, and in February, when people were killed en masse in Institutska Street, and he himself barely survived in the Mariinsky Park.
Don't fall asleep. Don't sleep. Are you alive, bro? Are you alive, bro? Good, he's alive.
After Maidan, directly from Kyiv's European Square, the citizen of Italy and Ukraine went to join the National Guard as a volunteer.
It wasn't a hard thing to do for me, because when you love and feel your work, when you love your profession and are proud of what you do, you will be good at this. During the Maidan events, our statehood was at stake. When the Crimea got occupied, when the Russian world came to the Donbass, it was already our independence at risk.
After President Yanukovych fled the country, Russia, in a gross violation of international law, annexed the Ukrainian Crimea by force and immediately unleashed a hybrid war in the east of Ukraine, calling it Russian Spring in their propaganda. Under the guise of the so-called popular uprising, an anti-governmental coup took place with the aim to declare pseudo-people's republics and annihilate Ukrainian statehood. In response to that, Ukraine's government launched an anti-terrorist operation in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, abbreviated as ATO. In the first half of 2014, Ukraine took the leading place on the front pages and TV channels of global media. The revolution of dignity in Ukraine, the fleeing of Yanukovych to Russia, Russia's annexation of the Crimea and its hybrid aggression in the Donbass, Ukraine's ATO and early presidential election, all that drew the attention of hundreds of foreign journalists. Most of them, well aware of the risk to their lives, rushed straight to the zone of hostilities. Among them was Andrea Rocchelli, an Italian freelance journalist, a member of Cesura independent photographic agency. From the city of Pavia in northern Italy, Russian citizen Andrei Mironov was with him as an interpreter. On Saturday, May 24, Ukraine, which was fighting the enemy and electing the president at the same time, had a so-called pre-election day of silence, when political campaigning is forbidden. But in the city of Slavyansk, in the north of Donetsk Oblast, on the way from Donetsk to Kharkiv, there was no smell of silence. The air was filled with other smells, like gunpowder from shelling, smoke from explosions and fires. And the smell of blood, too. In late May 2014, the death toll in the east of Ukraine ran into dozens. Slavyansk, with a population of 100,000, was seized by Russian combatants under the command of FSB officer Girkin, alias Strelkov, who unleashed terror against pro-Ukrainian population.
We felt the smell of death in the air. When you saw an unknown person in the street, your first reaction was to analyze this person, to understand what language to speak with him, figuratively speaking, how to talk to him, whether he was pro-Ukrainian or not, was he sent by someone or not, will this person inform on you or not. The identification, friend or enemy, got very difficult and unclear.
The strongholds and security checkpoints of Ukrainian ATO forces around the city, in particular the dominant height Kulchytsky Hill with a television tower, became major targets for the terrorists. The shelling came from various heavy weapons, in particular mortars.
This is our soldier who was killed in a mortar shelling.
In the afternoon of May 24, during a 2-hour battle at a checkpoint, reserve soldier Stanislav Zinchuk was killed by 2 direct shots from a grenade launcher. He was posthumously awarded the Order for Courage.
He was hit by 2 grenades. The second one hit him after he fell. That was when his knee was ripped out.
On the same day, May 24, and at about the same time, in a different location, in the southern outskirts of Slavyansk, near the railway crossing, next to the pottery factory Zeus Ceramica, photojournalist Andrei Rakali and his Russian interpreter Andrei Mironov were killed in a shelling. French journalist William Rogalon and his local driver Yevhen Koshman were wounded. On that tragic and fateful day, May 24, 2014, looking for a place to take impressive war photos, journalist Andrei Rakali, Andrei Mironov and William Rogalon, who came by taxi driven by Yevhen Koshman, came to the pottery factory Zeus Ceramica near the railway crossing. Everyone knew it was a fixed position of the terrorists and that shooting there was almost non-stop.
Armored train, chemical factory. They came to me spontaneously asking to take them here, to the factory. It turned out that we came to this railway crossing. They asked me to wait for them. I didn't expect any shooting to take place here. They went on their own business. I don't know why they went to the train cars. They wanted to capture something. There were train carriages welded together.
The terrorists used the train carriages on the railway crossing as a barricade, a cover for shelling the ATO forces on Kulchytsky Hill, where Ukraine's military were defending the TV tower. The distance from the railway crossing to the tower is over 1,700 meters. As soon as the journalists approached the positions, the terrorists opened fire. At first they were shooting from small arms, then they started shelling from mortars.
The shell came here. It's a long distance. I didn't understand who was shooting. I feared that I might get hit as well. Of course, I thought I should hide.
When the journalists heard the shooting in close proximity, they assessed the threat and did the only right thing. They took cover in this deep ditch. In the video recorded by William Rogalon on the spot, the shelling is clearly audible. The phonoscopic examination conducted by Ukrainian investigators established that the shelling came from a close distance. Our forces located 1,700 meters away couldn't have reached this place. It was done by the militants who were nearby and had the factory under their control. In the footage shot by Rogalon at that time, one can clearly hear the shelling at a close distance. There are also barely audible but very important words of the Russian interpreter Mironov.
This is a crossfire from Kalashnikov, single shots, from 2 sides. We're in the middle. Someone is shooting from everything he has. I think from the machine gun. There is a mortar nearby as well.
There is a mortar nearby too, clearly says Andrei Mironov, before his death. Indeed, right after that, those in the ditch came under aimed mortar shelling.
After the machine gun, or automatic gunfire, I heard the whistling sound. It started to explode. We hoped we would get lucky. The explosions got closer. Something exploded really close. The ripped leaves, broken branches, and soil started to fall. After that, something exploded close to us. The people got killed. That's the result. My arm was ripped. I was lying covering my head with my arms. If it didn't hit my arm, it would have hit my temple. So that's how my arm saved my head.
In this massive shelling, taxi driver Yevhen Koshman and French reporter William Reguilon were wounded. They were lucky to survive, but it happened on the territory controlled by the pro-Russian combatants. So the media of Russian propaganda, in particular the Russia Today TV channel, were the first to report the deaths of the journalists. And the Russian terrorists presented to the world the deceiving narrative that was favorable to them, claiming it was the Ukrainian military who killed the civilians by mortar fire from Karachun Hill.
Was it found on the spot? Yes, a piece of mortar mine. A part. In which area was it found? Next to them. Do you think the explosion area was over there? Yes, the branches are broken there. And where they were lying? In a ditch next to the road. There are two more stuck in the asphalt. Where did the shelling come from? They were firing from machine guns and mortars from over there. This is an armored train. Andrei Mironov was killed here, somewhere on this crossing.
In March 2014, 24-year-old Vitaliy Markiv came straight from the Maidan to the newly established 1st Operational Reserve Battalion of Ukraine's National Guard. That was the first volunteer unit of the renewed National Guard of Ukraine.
Besides, we started to select the guys who were the core of the Maidan. We brought them to Petrovci, to the base of the National Guard of Ukraine. That was another test for us, especially for several days at the beginning, when, on the one hand, there were regular servicemen of the internal troops of Ukraine. Only yesterday were on the Maidan and took place an operation against the Maidan activists. And on the other hand, there were the Maidan activists. There was a tent village of mobilized Maidan activists. On the right, there were the barracks of the internal troops. They had to eat in the same canteen. There were clashes, so the first several days were the most difficult ones. There were fights and very unpleasant conversations. And it seemed that these units couldn't be united and work together. But the external threats started to grow, so at some point in time, the guys must have understood that their hard feelings that they had were very petty. A huge role was played by the commanders working with them, including Sergey Petrovich Kulchytsky, the hero of Ukraine, who was killed. He was killed in late May. He succeeded in making them reconcile and unite. So they started to feel like one unit.
Later on, this battalion would become one of the most efficient units of the National Guard and would be named after its father, General Sergey Kulchytsky. But back then, in the fiery spring of 2014, after a month and a half of training, the inexperienced volunteers were sent near the town of Slavyansk, which was occupied by the militants commanded by Girkin. The situation there was getting increasingly tough. On May 2nd, 2014, Markiv's company was flown to the front line near Slavyansk to reinforce the 95th Air Assault Brigade.
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Glory to the nation!
Death to the enemy!
Ukraine
is the most important thing. I didn't have any emotions. You go to the war. I understand I was going to the war. I understood I could be killed there. I mean, I wasn't scared. There was an adrenaline rush in the helicopter. Of course, on one hand, we were rejoicing because we were on a helicopter. You understand that we could be killed right there. We only started to get the information that our helicopters had been shot down for the first time. And our helicopter could be shot down as well.
Then, near the village of Andriivka, close to Karachun Hill, the National Guard volunteers and the Air Assault Brigade were stopped by aggressive locals who blocked the road to prevent the troops from entering the city. It was there that Markiv had a conversation with Italian journalists, denouncing the enemy propaganda and explaining to them in clear terms why his mission was legal. How did you get to meet and what are you talking about in this video?
First of all, that wasn't an interview. That wasn't an interview at all. They asked what was going on, why those people were protesting. So I said, do you think it's a normal situation when residents of a country hoist a foreign flag saying they want to be a part of another country? Apparently this is not normal.
When it got dark, pro-Russian militants started shooting at the Assault Brigade and the National Guard from behind the backs of the protesters.
The first bottles with gasoline were thrown. Then we heard the first shots. At first, mechanic driver of the armored vehicle of the 95th Brigade was gravely wounded in the neck. A grenade came. As far as I understand, it came from a grenade launcher. One serviceman from the 95th Brigade was wounded in the stomach. He was ripped before our eyes.
The blocking of the unit by the local civilians turned out to be a trap. Our soldiers had to shoot their way out of it. They lost 2 people there.
When we were ascending the Karachun Hill, they started firing at us from the Karachun Hill. The battle lasted for about 40 minutes. After that, they fell back and we took the Karachun Hill and the broadcasting station. Karachun Hill at the time was controlled by the terrorists. The 95th Brigade attacked it and took it under their control. They regrouped, and in the morning, 2 or 3 hours later, we were told that we had to trench there and our mission was to defend the strategic height. That was it. And our service basically started on Karachun Hill.
Karachun Hill, with its television broadcasting tower, is the dominant height in the entire area of Slavyansk. Back then, in May 2014, it was being defended as a strategic site by Ukraine's 95th Assault Brigade and the National Guard battalion Vitaliy Markiv served in. Girkin's terrorists were shelling the hill non-stop with heavy weapons, mortars, and their strategic position was the pottery factory Zeus Ceramica and the railway crossing in front of it. There were train carriages the militants used as a cover. The distance to Karachun is 1,700 meters, even more, so it was physically impossible for Vitaliy Markiv to see the reporters, who at their peril came to the position of the militants to take impressive photos. In May 2014, all this area was covered with thick greenery. The woodland around the TV center was a nice cover for the terrorists. From there, they fired at the ATO forces. Our troops returned fire.
23rd Raven working from the PK on the green territory. Over. Roger that. Fire. Rounds. Yes, over there. After 2 weeks of the assault, they understood it was impossible to take us by storm. So they periodically fired at us, 10 or more times a day, from heavy weapons of different caliber. The main point from which they were firing continuously and repeatedly was located behind the train cars, to the opposite of the Karachun Hill, and a bit on the left, in the greenery. They were firing continuously from this place, not far from the railway crossing. You were unable to see what was behind the green canopy, behind the leaves, and closer to May 24th, the trees became even greener.
Saturday, May 24, 2014, is well remembered as a day when the shelling of Ukrainian positions on the hill was especially heavy.
A massed attack started from different points in Sloviansk. In the evening, there was a very difficult battle. I found out that something happened there on the next day.
Markiv found out about the killing of the Italian photojournalist from a phone call he received from his colleague, journalist Marcello Fauci.
One of the journalists I met on the Maidan called, saying that they got information that their colleagues were killed near Sloviansk. He knew I was near Sloviansk after the video from May 2nd. He asked me whether I knew anything about it. I said no. There are battles throughout the city in different directions. He asked whether he could come investigate. I tried to talk him out of it, saying it was unsafe there. There was real war out there.
For Vitaliy Markiv and his fellow servicemen, the defense of the broadcasting station was everyday routine. You stand guard in your post, observe your sector, report to the commander about what you saw, hide from the enemy fire, and during the short breaks between the attacks, grab some rest. The battles were especially fierce at night. In the darkness, the terrorists came closer. It was harder to spot them, so our servicemen had to contain the enemy and push them back harder with mortars and artillery. The assault brigade had those heavy weapons, unlike the National Guard. On May 29, 2014, only 5 days after civilians Raquel and Mironov were killed, the ATO forces suffered the biggest instant loss. The terrorists shot down a Mi-8 helicopter right after it took off. The 12 policemen and National Guard officers on board were killed, among them General Sergey Kulchytsky, the one who was like a father to the volunteer fighters of the 1st Reserve Battalion, including to Vitaliy Markiv.
We returned to the broadcasting station to look at the helicopter that took off from there and heard some gunfire. It sounded like a grenade explosion. After that, we saw a missile approaching the helicopter. It exploded in the air. Everyone who was in the field saw that. Everyone was shocked. Our general, our sworn brothers were killed in that attack. And those 6 special operation officers from the special police unit became, like brothers to us by that time.
During the rare breaks between the gunfights, the most pleasant were the moments when aid parcels with basic necessities arrived from civilian volunteers, in particular from the Ukrainian community in Italy. Surrounded by the enemy, under constant gunfire, they were lacking everything from water to ammunition. On May 30, 6 days after Raquel and Mironov were killed, we came here, where the National Guard unit was stationed on Karachun Hill. They lived in these buildings. When civilian volunteers brought humanitarian aid, Vitaliy Markiv was among those receiving it. Finally, after 75 days of siege and gunfights, Sloviansk was liberated by the ATO forces. It was Ukraine's first big victory. 63 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in the battles for the city. The battle for Sloviansk marked the beginning of a massive hybrid war unleashed by Russia in the east of Ukraine. This war is still raging, as the Kremlin, unhappy with Ukraine's independent, pro-European course, is trying to make it bend to its imperial will. For this purpose, Russia has been working on the international arena, where there is a strong coalition of countries supporting Ukraine. Russia needs to break it and stop the sanction policy. To achieve this, Russia is going out of its way to discredit Ukraine. Italy became one of the European countries where the Russian influence turned out to be massive. In November 2015, Staff Sergeant of Ukraine's National Guard Vitaliy Markiv was awarded the Medal for Military Service to Ukraine.
I'm sincerely grateful to you for being present here. Together we are strong and invincible. I serve the Ukrainian people. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Then he didn't know that the Italian police would soon place his mother and stepfather under close surveillance. In the Apennines, a wicked design came about, prompted by Russian agents of influence, to accuse the Ukrainian serviceman of murdering the Italian journalist. On June 30th, 2017, when Vitaliy and his wife came to Italy to visit his mother, for the first time since he left Italy in December 2013, he was arrested right at the airport.
That was it. They said, "That's it. You're going to prison." What prison? I need a lawyer. They said, "No, your lawyer will come see you in prison." What about the consul? No, everything will be in prison. When I was getting in the car, the last phrase I heard from the Carabiners colonel was, "Hope for Ukraine's cooperation." I asked, "What do you mean?" You heard me.
Ukraine was making huge efforts to defend Markiv. Diplomats, lawyers, and the diaspora were doing all they could to help him. Vitaly's defense was led by Raffaele Delle Valle, one of the most reputable Italian lawyers.
When he was detained, it received immediate broad coverage on television and in newspapers. He was called a murderer, a killer. I mean, the press made him guilty even before the trial. Our community has organized appeals and protests many times.
La Farnesina conferma la morte del fotoreporter italiano Andrea Rocchelli nell'est dell'Ucraina.
Dell'est e purtroppo la Farnesina ha confermato la morte di un fotoreporter italiano, Andrea Rocchelli, e del suo interprete, un russo con passaporto italiano.
Rocchelli, il fotoreporter italiano morto in Ucraina con il suo interprete russo sotto una raffica di colpi di mortaio.
The investigation hastily put together charges, accusing Markiv of complicity in the murder of Rocchelli, and sent the case to court, following simple logic. Since the Italian photojournalist was killed at the terrorist position, the gunfire must have come from the Ukrainian soldiers on Karachun Hill. And since Markiv was there, he must be an accomplice to the murder. The allegation was that he spotted the journalists from a 1,700-meter distance, decided to kill them, and sent the coordinates of the target to the mortarman.
The investigators have never been on the site of the events. They have never come to Ukraine. They haven't investigated the circumstances. They never collected any ballistic evidence or carry out any ballistic analysis. They don't know who was shelling or what weapons were used.
In court, the prosecution was using a number of ridiculous pieces of evidence, like a video where Markiv with his fellow servicemen were receiving volunteers' aid, a photo from Vitaly's phone where he is holding a grenade launcher, a fake letter allegedly from the National Guard with numerous factual and spelling mistakes. An Italian citizen, Vitaliy repeatedly received offers to plead guilty and testify against his commanders.
Clearly, that was a Kremlin's narrative. They said, "You have nothing to lose. You have documents. Why do you need to cover criminals?" I said, "What criminals? What are you talking about?"
In May 2019, defense witnesses testified in the court of Pavia. Those were Markiv's 4 fellow servicemen in the National Guard and the National Guard commander. Under the oath, they testified before the Italian justice that Vitaliy was not guilty of Rocchelli's death. He was legally defending his country, standing guard on the hill, on a different position and in a different sector than the direction where the photojournalist was killed. The distance to the place of his death exceeded the shooting range of the National Guard's firearms, and they did not have any mortars. Minister Avakov headed the delegation.
All this falsified provocations that have led to Markiv's arrest nearly 2 years ago in Italy, and started with the provocations in the websites like Russian Spring, etc., were part of one big system of the war against Ukraine.
In spite of the absurdity of the presented proofs, in July 2019, the jury court in Pavia, Rocchelli's hometown, found Vitaliy Markiv guilty. The judge sentenced him even to a longer sentence than the prosecutor had asked for, 24 years in prison.
I feel terrible. No one expected that. No one from us expected that. I think that even the other side didn't expect such a ruling either. Vitaliy said, "We will fight, this is not the end. We will defend our truth." Pavia has shown how the courts function in Pavia. It's okay. We will show them that there are other courts that are more fair, and we'll win together with him. Are you feeling an appeal? Without doubt. That goes without saying.
"24 years in prison. That extremely harsh and unfair verdict of the first sentence court in Pavia left hardly any chances to Vitaliy Markiv.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to heroes. Please say a few words to the Ukrainian citizens, maybe an emotion or a call.
Ukraine must be united. Together we will win.
By the time the verdict was returned, Markiv had spent 2 years in the Opera prison, which is one of the toughest in Italy. Meanwhile, his defense started to prepare an appeal, and in Ukraine, an in-depth criminal investigation of the killing of Rokelli and Mironov got off the ground. For the previous 3 years, it had been gathering dust at Ukraine's security service.
Italian law enforcers have never been to Ukraine. They have never been on the site where the Italian citizen was killed. Therefore, the investigation wasn't fully completed, and Vitaliy Markiv was denied an indisputable right for objective investigation and defense.
Ukraine's General Prosecutor's Office transferred the case from the SSU to the National Police Investigation Department. Within a short space of time, a detailed investigation was carried out. First, they used the evidence gathered by the local police in Slavyansk, soon after the city was liberated in summer 2014. It was this young lady, currently police captain Alla Derkach, who found the main primary physical evidence from the site where the victims were killed.
Those were journalists Andrea Rokelli and Russian interpreter Andrei Mironov's possessions. Besides, we found a handwritten note as well as fragments of shrapnel, which were retrieved during the autopsy.
These are the clothes received by the forensic surgeon in the morgue and later taken from there by investigator Alla Derkach. Trousers, coats and shoes that the victims were wearing. And these are the metal pieces removed from their mutilated bodies. The conclusions of the examination are definite. These are fragments of a 120mm mortar round, and it could have been fired from various directions, despite the barriers like buildings, fences, trees, etc. And this is the most interesting find, a note in Russian found in Mironov's pocket. "I've just talked to Victor. He promised to solve the question with a photo with Strelkov. 2 minutes. Signed, Horosheva."
We have found out that Stella Horosheva has been residing in Italy for nearly 20 years, and when Slavyansk was under occupation, she was a press secretary of self-proclaimed Mayor Ponomarev. Under these circumstances, the investigation cannot exclude the version that Italian journalist Rokelli, Russian Mironov and French journalist Brugulan were purposely lured by the illegal armed groups to the Zeus factory.
A thorough forensic examination on the place of their death was conducted on May 24, 2020, in order to get as close as possible to the natural conditions of the day of the tragedy. The sound and video tests with live fire from weapons of different caliber clearly defined the distance from which the shelling came and was recorded by William Rogolan's camera in the ditch hideout.
3 shots, live rounds. Live rounds. 3, 2, 1. According to the expertise results, the sounds of gunfire recorded on William Rogolan's camera came from rifles, similar to the AKM-74 placed near the Zeus factory, at a distance of 145-150 meters from the place where Rokelli and Mironov were killed. It couldn't be fired from the 1.7-kilometer distance, namely our soldier Mironov's position. Here is the video of our investigation experiment. Come on 1. 3, 2, 1.
In addition, the investigators found and thoroughly questioned 2 direct witnesses who saw Rokelli and Mironov before their death, taxi driver Koshman.
We were sitting at about this distance. During the gunfire, no one was talking.
And local resident Tolsty, a previously unidentified witness who was hiding in the ditch with the journalist during the mortar shelling.
We were sitting here, the interpreter was sitting in front of him, and they were talking like that.
Both Koshman and Tolsty confirmed that the terrorists were the first to open fire on the journalists. Besides, witness Hlushkov said when he was driving the wounded French journalist Rogolan away, his car came under fire from the terrorists nearby, and not from the Ukrainian soldiers on the hill more than 1,700 meters away.
He sat on the front seat, and I heard that some bomb hit the target. I got scared and quickly drove away. At the same time, several bullets hit the car. We have found the car and questioned the witnesses. You can see the examination of this car on the video. Indeed, the vehicle was damaged by automatic gunfire, according to our expert. This damage couldn't be caused from that distance I have mentioned, from the position of our soldier, because automatic gun cannot physically reach that far.
In the same way, acoustic, optic, ballistic and trace examinations were carried out on Karachun Hill, on the position where on that day Vitaliy Markiv was standing guard at the broadcasting station. It was ascertained that from that position it was impossible to see anyone on the road at the factory, let alone to see people down in the ditch at the railway crossing with train carriages.
From Karachun, it was impossible to see either the cars or the road or the journalist who came here.
Why so?
First of all, because of the trees. Secondly, due to their location, neither the cars nor the people over there couldn't be noticed from the Karachun Hill.
All the evidence collected by national police was prepared by the defense team to be used in the appeal.
We expect that our today's public press conference, as well as the materials we have revealed at the permission of the investigation, will be added, among others, by the Ukrainian lawyer that will be present at Makariv's appeal process, his personal lawyer, and we will send everything to Italian official authorities. Hopefully, the Milan Court of Appeal will hear this case without prejudice.
While the lawyers are preparing the appeal, Vitaliy Markiv, in a video chat permitted by the court, shows resilience and courage of a true national guardsman.
I'm a serviceman of armed formations of Ukraine, and I understand really well when I gave an oath to serve and protect my motherland. I've always been and will be the serviceman of Ukraine. Agreed.
Staff Sergeant Vitaliy Markiv, deputy platoon commander of the Kulchytsky battalion of Ukraine's National Guard, was one of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian warriors who came to defend their land from the Russian aggression.
Smile, you're being filmed by hidden cam.
But at the same time, he became the only one to be convicted by a European court for allegedly a war crime against civilians, the foreign journalists. If the verdict had taken effect, its impact would have been devastating for Markiv's future and for Ukraine's reputation on the international arena, as well as for other Ukrainian servicemen.
What they wrote was nonsense, that Ukraine used out of principle, that Ukrainian army out of principle used force illegally against civil population, that there is a civil war underway in Ukraine, and that Ukraine's National Guard is only a half-military unit, which consists of foreigners. Come on.
In its verdict, the court bluntly encouraged the Italian prosecutor's office to bring criminal charges against Bogdan Matkivsky, Markiv's commanding officer.
In my opinion, their task was to get to Ukrainian military leaders of high command and subsequently accuse Ukrainian government and Ukrainian forces of incompetence and total chaos allegedly reigning in Ukrainian army.
In February 2020, Ukraine's president, during his official visit to Italy, discussed Markiv's case with Italy's Prime Minister Conte and President Mattarella, as well as with Pope Francis. He also met with Markiv's mother.
It is very important for Vitaliy that Ukraine, its president, the Verkhovna Rada, entire Ukraine supported him. We will help you. Just don't cry, please. Everything will be good with all the support Vitaliy is getting. I understand that the Prime Minister cannot influence the Italian courts, but I have explained to him in detail what happened there, at what distance he was from the site where the journalists were killed.
After the investigation, it became clear how the Italian journalist and his interpreter were killed, and the Ukrainian taxi driver and the French journalist wounded on May 24th. They came to the position of the militants and went to take pictures of the train carriages, damaged in shootouts with our troops stationed on the far-off hill. As soon as the terrorists spotted strangers, they started shooting at them from small arms, and when the journalists hid in the ditch, the militants shelled them with mortar rounds.
If there was no one except for the journalists, if Ukrainian servicemen couldn't get to the territory, there is only one logical decision to make. The terrorists were shooting at the journalists. That was masterminded by Russia. I'm more than sure of that. I can feel it. Their task is to discredit the Ukrainian servicemen, the Ukrainian armed forces overall. They use any methods to achieve that goal. They have been waging an information war against us and won't stop doing that.
In May, our servicemen noticed that the terrorists often started sporadic shooting within the city.
They were clearly shooting at one another. We could see it all the time. Well, it happened from time to time, but we could see that crystal clear from the hill. One group was firing from one position, then another started firing from another one. So there was some exchange of fire. We observed this. There were even explosions.
This video, recorded in May 2014 by the terrorists, is a proof of that.
What are you doing? That's his fucking house. That's his fucking house. We thought you were right sector. What the hell are you doing? We came on request. Whose request? We are on request here. They are fucking armed.
But let's go back to the Italian trial. Late September, the Milan jury court started hearing the appeal filed by Markiv's defense. The trial was held during the lockdown, with considerable restrictions, but Ukraine's Interior Minister Avakov was present. One of the key decisions ruled by the court was to request new translation of Markiv's words, recorded in his prison cell by way of investigative operation. The previous investigation concluded that those words could be considered an acknowledgement of guilt. Allegedly, in a conversation with his cellmate, Vitaliy said a phrase which semantically meant, "We killed a journalist."
It was so obvious that it was an absurd lie that, in my opinion, the judge started to suspect that something was wrong. Especially that the first sign was when the judge refused to take into consideration the words from a taping mission. And especially those three words, "We killed journalists." The conversation was translated again.
Step by step, the defense not only refuted this evidence, but destroyed the entire case the prosecution had built. On November 3rd, the Jury Court of Appeal returned a verdict in favor of Vitaliy Markiv. He was acquitted of all charges. In the courtroom, the defense were not hiding their joy, and in the evening, after 1,222 days behind bars, Vitaliy was released.
We have proved that there is truth. There is justice. And my first conviction proved that the Kremlin propaganda has no borders.
I'm happy that our arguments were heard today, that the team of lawyers and like-minded people, everyone who has come here today, has finally managed to make the Milano court rule this decision. That was a courageous decision, because the first instance court ignored the facts, like the fact that Vitaliy couldn't shoot at this journalist, and he was in a different place at that time. Thank you, thank you.
Our delegation's homecoming was triumphant. At the airport, they were welcomed by a guard of honor, tens of journalists, and Vitaliy's beloved wife.
Did he call you?
All the charges against me have been withdrawn, not only against me, but entire Ukraine as well, as a defender in this process. To be honest, I didn't believe in this. I was getting ready for the worst scenario, but hoped for the better. And I asked God to help me through this with dignity and not to shame myself.
For the spiritual fortitude Vitaliy showed during the 3 years behind bars, his beatitude Epiphanius, the primate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, awarded the former Italian prisoner the Order of Michael the Archangel, the protector of all the military and the leader of heavenly warriors. Vitaliy endured all the trials. He never gave up and refused to betray his country by admitting non-existing guilt. It is for this victory that Markiv now has his first non-military spiritual decoration. In memory of Ukraine's defenders, whose names and portraits are immortalized at St. Michael's Cathedral, Vitaliy and his wife lit candles in its main temple.
It is very important that Ukraine now has its own Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
We have been fighting to achieve this for nearly 30 years. Why can't we have a church of our own, like other countries? Ukrainian language is called a wrong language. Ukrainian church is called a wrong one. But everything is considered to be perfect if connected with Moscow. Without Moscow, we're deemed wrong.
Well, for years.
Centuries.
For centuries, this inferiority complex has been imposed on us. They wanted us to think that we are incapable of doing anything on our own. We must overcome this complex. But I think we are on the right path.
Of course, it's a difficult, thorny road, but I believe that we can complete it.
This is Italy. Mom, I'm at home.
Vitaliy Markiv was a victim of information war. It was a case of Russian influence and deliberate provocation, which took place not without participation of Italian journalists. And this war waged by Russia against Ukraine is still going on.